The Minoans were a Bronze Age people that inhabited the island of Crete. They developed the first advanced culture in Europe and were among the most significant civilizations of the Bronze Age. They are famous for their magnificent architectural complexes and their elaborate art that continues to captivate audiences to this day. In this video, we will delve into the history and culture of the Minoan people to find out what makes them one of history's most intriguing civilizations. Until the late 19th century, archaeological knowledge of Greece and Western Anatolia largely extended no further back than the 8th century BC. This led scholars to dismiss the legends and tales referring to earlier ages, such as those of the Iliad and the Odyssey, as purely fictional, lacking any genuine historical foundation. This perception changed dramatically with the excavations of archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, who brought to light the cities of Mycenae and Troy, revealing that these ancient stories had some historical basis after all. Following these discoveries, interest in the island of Crete grew among archaeologists. They knew that many ancient Greek historians, poets, and storytellers shared tales of a once powerful civilization that flourished on the island in the days of old. These stories tell of a people with a formidable fleet that dominated the Aegean Sea, led by the legendary king Minos, the son of Zeus. In 1878, towards the end of Ottoman rule on the island, a group of Greek antiquarians established a team dedicated to exploring and excavating the island's rich history. Led by Dr. Joseph Hatzidakis, the association included Minos Kalokerinos, who, after studying numerous ancient texts, carried out excavations on a hill south of the city of Heraklion. What he uncovered was remarkable. Remnants of a civilization that predates classical Greece by thousands of years. With assistance from Italian archaeologists, further excavations were conducted at several sites. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans took control of the site that Kalokerinos had explored, ultimately uncovering what became known as the Palace of Knossos. Evans named this civilization the Minoans after King Minos, though their Bronze Age contemporaries refer to them as Keftu or Kafter. Over the following century, a diverse group of archaeologists from Greece, Italy, Britain, the United States, and Germany gradually uncovered the remnants of the Minoan civilization, shedding light on this long-lost world. Drawing on the available evidence, we will explore the nature and history of the Minoan people, as far as these findings allow us to understand. Evidence of human presence in Crete dates back to the Middle Paleolithic, when hunter-gatherers arrived on the island using simple canoes. These visitors would usually rest along the coast or in caves before continuing their journeys or settling intermittently. The first permanent inhabitants were Neolithic farmers from Anatolia who began to arrive around 7000 BC. They established several small settlements, including the site of Knossos. These early farmers introduced agriculture to the island, gradually domesticating and cultivating vast areas of previously wild land. By the late Neolithic period, new settlements began to emerge, including those that would later become known as Phaistos and Gortyn. At Knossos, the population grew to between 300 and 600 people. During this period, pottery was developed along with figurines made of clay, stone, and marble. As we approach the beginning of the Bronze Age, understanding the formation of the Minoans as a people requires examining Crete's landscape during this period, along with its flora and fauna, and exploring how the islanders engaged with their environment. Crete lies to the southeast of the Greek mainland, positioned at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. It ranks as the 12th largest island in Europe, stretching 260 kilometers in length and varying in width from 12 to 60 kilometers. The island's landscape is defined by its prominent mountain ranges, the Thrypti and Dikti mountains to the east, the Ida and Asterousia mountains in the central region, and the White Mountains to the west, with elevations ranging between 1,470 and 2,400 meters. Due to the mountainous terrain, there are many elevated plateaus like the Lasithi Plateau, as well as numerous small isolated valleys and plains, with the notable exception of the expansive fertile plain of Messara. This diverse topography fostered semi-isolated communities and historically made unification across the island challenging. Crete's climate varies widely, with the western regions typically experiencing cool, windy and wet conditions, while the rest of the island has a drier yet very fertile climate. Elevated areas, though, generally tend to remain cool all year round. Crete has an impressive variety of flora with around 2,000 species. These include trees such as pines, oaks, maples, cypress, plane trees and date palms, along with shrubs like Cretan ebony and herbs like oregano, thyme and spiny chicory. Agriculture was the primary occupation of the Minoans, supported by the fertile plateaus, valleys and coastal plains, which were perfect for mid-scale crop cultivation. There they grew olives, wheat, barley and legumes. The foothills and plateaus were primarily used for cultivating fruit trees such as figs and vineyards for grape production. Livestock herding was also a central part of many people's lives. They raised goats, sheep, cattle and pigs. Shepherds with large flocks of goats and sheep would seasonally move their herds between winter and summer grazing areas. Livestock animals provided milk, wool and meat, while some, like cattle, were also used for farm labor. Early Minoan Crete was rich in wildlife, home to species such as partridges, falcons, wild cats, and the famous Cretan ibex. The Minoans also practiced hunting, focusing primarily on deer, hares, boars, and various species of wild birds. Last but not least, the sea was a major aspect of the Minoan culture. Those who lived along the coast engaged in fishing, consuming a wide variety of foods like octopus, squid, red mullet, garfish, swordfish, and sea urchins. The sea also played a vital role in connecting the Minoans with other civilizations, fostering trade and cultural exchange. By 3200 BC, Crete was home to hundreds of settlements. While larger sites like Knossos housed communities of 500 to 600 people, the island was predominantly dotted with smaller villages with around 150 to 200 people. These villages were scattered across both the fertile lowlands and the rugged mountainous interior. Additionally, the Minoans established numerous coastal settlements, particularly along the northern shores, where natural harbors provided ideal locations for port towns. Between 3200 and 3000 BC, waves of settlers from mainland Greece, the Aegean Islands and western Anatolia arrived in Crete. These groups founded new settlements in naturally fortified areas. Following this period, agriculture and herding advanced significantly. Innovations included the proper management and expansion of olive cultivation and the production of various new dairy products. This contributed to a steady increase in Crete's population, leading to the emergence of numerous additional settlements across the countryside. During that time, buildings made of stone began to be constructed, and some families seem to have achieved great wealth through agriculture. This is particularly evident in south-central Crete in the Messara plain, where large circular tholus tombs were constructed to serve as burial sites for entire clans. Burial practices varied across the island. In eastern Crete, single rock-cut tombs were prevalent, whereas in north-central Crete, the deceased were buried collectively in caves and rock crevices. The artifacts uncovered from these burials are significantly more elaborate than earlier finds. They include painted clay vessels, animal-shaped rhytons, numerous clay strays and pyxes, and figurines influenced by the Cycladic style. Metal tools and weapons also begin to appear during this period. Between 2600 and 2200 BC, Crete experienced significant social, economic, and cultural growth. During this time, trade in the Aegean and Mediterranean Sea began to flourish. Due to its limited supply of raw materials, Crete developed active trade networks across the region. Copper was imported from Lavrion and islands such as Sifnos, Seriphus, and Kithnos, while tin came from the Levant. Gold, silver, and lead were imported from the Peloponnese, and obsidian rock was brought in from Milos. Additionally, gold and ivory were imported from North Africa. Coastal workshops in Crete, ran by both Cycladic people and local Cretans, played a crucial role in the production and processing of pottery, obsidian, and various metal tools, weapons, and jewelry. Within that time, the Minoans founded a colony on the island of Cythera to strengthen their trade links with the Peloponnese. Minoan exports, according to the available evidence, primarily included olive oil, textiles, and pottery. During this period, a specialized artisan class emerged, and the Cretans gradually became masters of both pottery and metallurgy. Meanwhile, large settlements in mainland Greece and prosperous communities in the Cycladic islands flourished due to the surge in trade. Crete experienced a similar economic boom, leading to the growth of regional centers that would later become famous, such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Mallia. These settlements, situated near fertile plains, supported populations ranging from 700 to 2,000 people. Their locations allowed them to develop into key hubs, serving surrounding communities and villages and gradually establishing themselves as regional centers. This period also saw the emergence of a more defined social hierarchy, with evidence of rich, aristocratic tombs found in various locations across Crete. However, these tombs were primarily located in smaller settlements rather than the larger regional centers. According to the findings, there was a significant increase in weapon crafting on Crete during that time. A wide range of weapons, including spearheads, short swords, chisels, knives, axes, and arrows were discovered in tombs. Additionally, many small villages in the countryside featured large fortifications, suggesting a growing tension between local communities. Around 2200 BC, a period of turbulence and chaos began, affecting not only Crete but the broader region as well. Severe droughts caused widespread population loss and triggered large-scale migrations, leading to the destruction or abandonment of many settlements. On Crete, numerous villages were either abandoned entirely or relocated to more secure, fortified inland areas. This time of upheaval lasted for roughly a century. Following the century of turmoil, the Minoans and the wider Eastern Mediterranean experienced a remarkable resurgence, marked by a renewed phase of cultural and societal advancements. This revival was driven by improved agricultural techniques, the enrichment from re-established trade, and the population surge. New immigrants arrived in Crete, founding several new settlements. Many abandoned settlements were restored, and new fortifications were built. The regional centers such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Mallia expanded substantially, with the construction of paved streets, artisan workshops, and large communal spaces. These settlements grew to populations ranging from 5,000 to 11,000 people. At Mallia, along with several fortified villages, evidence points to the presence of an emerging aristocracy. It is indicated by increasingly large tombs and opulent burials containing objects imported from Egypt and the Levant, such as gold diadems and ivory. Additionally, many new burial practices were introduced from abroad, including cist graves, Phaistos burials, larnaces, and large rectangular house tombs. Trade flourished during this period, with various styles of pottery exported across the seas. In addition to pottery, the Minoans exported textiles, olive oil, wine, and timber. In return, they imported metals, stones, and ivory. Minoan artisans became highly skilled in crafting bronze items, driven by a significant influx of tin to the island, which was needed for alloying with copper to produce bronze. At that period, the Minoans were deeply influenced by Near Eastern cultures, adopting artistic styles, architectural techniques, and religious beliefs that enriched their own traditions. These external influences, combined with economic growth, the arrival of immigrants, and the gradual development of Cretan society over centuries, sparked a profound and transformative shift in Crete, reshaping its social structure and cultural identity. The most significant of these changes was the construction of the first large building complexes, now known as Minoan palaces, around 1900 BC. These palace complexes were built in rapidly expanding towns such as Knossos, Mallia, Phaistos, and Petras. The only exception was Zakros, which was established as a settlement around 2000 BC and constructed its palace a century later, during the same time as the others. Population estimates for these palace towns vary, with evidence suggesting that the smaller towns housed between 5,000 and 10,000 inhabitants, while the largest one, Knossos, reached up to 17,500. The towns featured a central palace, open courts, paved streets lined with houses and workshops, and even drainage systems. Surrounding these towns were hundreds of villages and hamlets, farmsteads, shepherds' compounds, and great guardhouses or watchtowers, all interconnected by a network of rural roads. Some palace towns were linked to settlements beyond their immediate hinterlands. These often included large stone houses known today as villas, which likely served as small administrative centers in place of the main palaces. Positioned strategically either inland to oversee surrounding areas or along the coast as ports, these smaller sites maintained direct connections to the main towns. Some densely populated settlements like Palekastro seem to have been independent and unlinked to the palace towns. The countryside was heavily populated during this period. Despite their name, the Minoan palaces were not royal residences but rather temple complexes. These large structures featured multiple shrines, courts for communal feasts and religious ceremonies, as well as workshops, administrative halls, and storerooms. Similar to the Near Eastern counterparts, the Minoan temples served as both religious and administrative centers. Thanks to advanced farming techniques and the expansion of the flocks, a significant surplus of food, wool, and other produce was generated in the hinterlands. The villages surrounding the major towns would offer tribute to the temples. The large storerooms within the complexes were designed to store this surplus, which could either be redistributed to the people in times of need, or exported to other Cretan settlements or overseas. It remains unclear whether this tribute was due to taxes imposed by the temples or motivated by the religious devotion of the people. Another notable feature of the major towns was the concentration of professional artisans, many of whom worked directly under temple patronage. These included potters, stone vase makers, weavers, jewelers, and metalworkers. Clear distinctions among social classes are evident in the archaeological record. Administrative seals and architectural styles point to three social classes. At the top were the palatial officials, who were likely priests or priestesses overseeing both administrative and ceremonial functions. Below them was a wealthy class that held significant influence, as indicated by the seals they used and the presence of large storerooms in their residences outside the palace. This suggests that these individuals owned parts of the hinterland and acquired surplus produce independently from the temples. The presence of various professions such as merchants, artisans, and shipwrights points to a complex society with specialized roles and active trade networks. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the commoners, who rarely used seals, highlighting their limited involvement in administrative affairs. Architectural remains reinforce these distinctions, with the elite residing in large stone villas while commoners lived in simpler, rubble-built homes. The division is also reflected in burial practices. Elites were buried with ornate artifacts, while the graves of lower classes were much more modest. The question of whether a ruler or consul led the temple system or the town as a whole remains unresolved. The identity and role of the central authority in Protopalatial Minoan society are still debated. There are no clear symbols of divine kingship such as those in the Near East and Egypt. If there was a Minoan leader, he or she likely held a more religious and ceremonial role, overseeing public rituals rather than exercising political power. Palatial spaces such as banquet halls for communal ceremonies indicate that the ruler's position was tied to sacred duties and maintaining social harmony. While these officials may have held some authority, their role lacked the centralized power typical of kingship elsewhere, implying a less authoritarian leadership structure. It is likely that a council of aristocrats or priests made important decisions, possibly under the authority of a symbolic ruler. During this time, the need to manage storerooms and workshops led to the development of the first writing systems in Crete. The earliest script developed was what we now refer to as Cretan hieroglyphic, used from around 2000 to 1700 BC. This script was primarily employed for administrative tasks such as recording commodities and transactions, though it also appears to have had some religious uses. Approximately 475 inscriptions have been discovered on siltstones, clay tablets, and other artifacts from sites like Knossos, Mallia, and Archaeology. Cretan hieroglyphics is a mixed syllabic and logographic writing system, combining symbols that represent both sounds and words. The script contains over 3,000 symbols, and scholars have identified more than 90 syllabic signs and over 30 logograms. Despite its name, Cretan hieroglyphs bear little resemblance to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Although extensive research has been conducted, the script remains undeciphered, though a few isolated signs have been tentatively identified. The Cretan hieroglyphic script was gradually replaced by the Linear A writing system, which was developed on the island around 1800 BC and remained in use until the mid-15th century BC. Linear A has been found at major Minoan sites such as Knossos, Phaistos, Zakros, and other smaller locations across Crete, the Aegean Islands, and the Greek mainland. The script is primarily found on clay tablets used for record keeping, as well as on high-status items like discs and religious offerings. Linear A consists of thousands of distinct signs, including syllabic characters, ideograms denoting objects or concepts such as animals, goods, or people, and numerical symbols. Some numerals appear to follow a decimal system with separate signs for integers and fractions. Linear A remains undeciphered, with linguists unable to definitively link it to any known language. However, they have identified a few ideograms, particularly for common animals, foodstuffs, and tools, offering some insight into the script. In addition to the two primary writing systems, there is a remarkable artifact known as the Phaistos disc, discovered in the old palace at Phaistos, dating to approximately 1850 to 1550 BC. This clay disc features a complex spiral arrangement of 242 symbols impressed on both sides. Its meaning remains unknown. Scholars have proposed various theories about its purpose, ranging from it being a religious hymn or court list to some sort of guide for Mediterranean trade routes. The disc is notable for its technique of stamping symbols into the clay, marking the first known instance of stamped writing in history. The Protopalatial period came to an end around 1700 BC, when the palace complexes and major towns were destroyed. The destruction was primarily caused by a series of large earthquakes that collapsed buildings and in the process triggered fires, which further ravaged the settlements. Following these natural disasters, it is likely that attacks and looting occurred. After these events, the Minoans swiftly rebounded with extensive rebuilding efforts, constructing even larger and much more elaborate palace complexes and towns. The advancements of this period reflect a highly organized and culturally sophisticated civilization. During the Neo-Palatial period, the population of Crete became increasingly urbanized, with Knossos emerging as the largest settlement in the Aegean, inhabited by approximately 40,000 people. The palace of Knossos, along with those other major centers such as Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros, as well as smaller ones like Agia Triada, Gurnia, and Kydonia, were surrounded by large towns. These towns featured designated areas for commerce, residential quarters, and paved streets. As in the earlier period, the towns were supported by rural communities and agricultural fields. Beyond the major urban centers, smaller settlements often developed around central structures known as villas. These villas were smaller-scale versions of the temple palaces, serving a similar array of administrative and possibly religious functions within their local regions. They acted as regional hubs of authority, likely overseeing local governance and hosting ceremonial events. Surrounding these villas were smaller hamlets, farmsteads, and shepherds' compounds. These developments resulted in Minoan Crete being divided into numerous small states, shaped largely by the island's rugged terrain with its isolated valleys and plains. The states centered around larger towns frequently encompassed other major settlements, including ports and agricultural village centers, and would have undoubtedly exerted influence over smaller neighboring states. While the island was extensively interconnected by a network of roads and trade thrived among the Minoans, it would be a mistake to assume that they were a unified people under a single state. A persistent myth, first introduced by archaeologist Arthur Evans, portrays the Minoans as a peaceful and pacifistic society. However, recent evidence has challenged this notion, revealing the presence of fortifications on the island that suggest occasional conflicts both among the Minoans themselves and quite possibly with external groups. For instance, at the town of Gurnia, the coastline was protected by a wall and a tower. Similarly, the city of Mallia was surrounded by a defensive wall, while a series of bastions were found around the town of Palekastro. Additionally, small forts were strategically positioned along the routes to Zakros. The countryside featured numerous guardhouses serving similar defensive functions for smaller settlements. Even though no fortifications have been identified at Knossos, the layout of the palace itself was designed to make invasion and internal navigation incredibly challenging. Evidence of site destruction and abandonment, along with the contents of Minoan graves which contain a significant number of weapons, serve as indicators of conflict. It is reasonable to assume that the size of the Minoan small states' territories fluctuated throughout this period, shaped by warfare, the threat of conflict, or political power. For instance, there is evidence suggesting that Knossos may have exerted influence over many major towns. This may have been the case for the more prominent towns, as signs of conflict appear to be more prevalent in the smaller settlements. Due to the absence of written records, as Linear A remains undeciphered, it is challenging to determine the precise structure of Minoan society, including the specifics of social classes and the identity of their rulers. However, through archaeological evidence such as buildings, seals, tablets, and votive objects, we can attempt to reconstruct a possible social hierarchy for the Neo-Palatial period. A ruler may have occupied a position at the top of the hierarchy, though this remains debated, much like in the Protopalatial period. Some evidence supports the existence of such a role. If so, the ruler likely maintained an interdependent relationship with the temple administration. Their role was probably ceremonial, with the priests granting political legitimacy, though they may have also had military duties. Under this ruler, an elite group, likely composed of priestesses and priests, along with a small council of nobles, held significant influence. They oversaw temple activities and managed important affairs of the broader town. Just below this elite class were the merchants, who lived in large houses near bustling trade centers. These houses were built with the ashlar technique, which was also used for the palaces, highlighting their high status. The middle class consisted of artisans and tradesmen who crafted goods essential to the local economy, like clay vessels and bronze tools. Below them were the farmers and shepherds. These people lived in rural homes and frequently worked in service to the temples or on the private estates of the wealthy elite. In the major towns, centralized control over resources was emphasized. The temples were hubs for the flow of agricultural goods, crafts, and imported trade materials, which were then redistributed for religious, mercantile, civic, and potentially royal use. While centralized control by the temple limited private economic activity, evidence of gathering spaces like agoras and some independent crafting suggests room for localized, small-scale trade and civic interaction, with trade also being practiced by both the temple administration and independent traders. Minoan society stands out for the relatively high standard of living enjoyed by the majority, especially when compared to their counterparts in the Near East and North Africa. While the homes and villas of the upper classes were indeed luxurious, featuring great halls and small basins, the houses of the common people were notably superior to those in the Near East. Most common Minoan homes included storage areas for food or livestock, workspaces for food preparation or pottery making, a living room, and bedrooms located on the upper floor. Another fascinating characteristic of Minoan society was its level of literacy. Based on thousands of linear A inscriptions and seals, it seems that reading and writing were not confined to the aristocracy or a small elite class of scribes, as was typical in the Near East, but were instead more widely accessible. Perhaps most intriguing is the inclusivity of Minoan public spaces. Unlike in the contemporary cultures, where the grand temples and other ceremonial areas were often exclusive to the elite, many spaces of the Minoan temples were open to the public. Great feasts and ceremonies were held as communal events, allowing all members of society to participate. To gain a deeper understanding of Minoan culture and society during this period, we will explore the famous Palace of Knossos. The Palace of Knossos was a marvel of Minoan engineering and one of the most remarkable structures of the Bronze Age. Situated on a terraced hill, the palace overlooked the city and the surrounding valley. Although one could enter from 7 to 8 different small gates, the complex featured 2 main entrances, the northwest entrance and the southwest entrance. The northwest entrance connected to the Royal Road, a stone-paved street considered one of the oldest in Europe. This road passed through the city, flanked by large houses, workshops, and an arsenal. As it continued east, the road split into 2 paths. One led to the theatral area, an open space with L-shaped tiers of steps capable of accommodating around 500 people for communal events. The other path led to the northwest entrance. Entering here, visitors would pass to a narrow corridor flanked by a series of columns emerging into the central court. The central court was a vast rectangular space of about 25 by 50 meters and was the core of palace life, connecting all major entrances and important rooms while serving as a great gathering space. The court, mostly paved in flagstones, provided vital light, air, and accessibility to the palace interior. Connected to the central court by the grand staircase, the east wing was originally a 4-level structure, though only 3 levels remain today. The grand staircase featured flights of stairs bordered by colonnades on each level, with a light well on the east side providing natural light. The east wing featured massive storerooms filled with large storage jars known as pithoi, alongside workshops producing pottery, stone, and metal goods. The southern section included the Hall of the Double Axes, named after the double axe symbols engraved on its wall. The hall consisted of an inner and outer chamber, with the inner space enclosed by 11 pairs of double doors. A portico supported by columns extended from the main room. A small doorway led to the Dolphin Sanctuary, which featured built-in benches, a private inner court, and frescoes including an illustrious depiction of dolphins, fish, and sea urchins. Nearby was the Shrine of the Double Axes. The west wing contained some of the most famous sections of the palace. The first is the throne room, which is located at ground level and was separated from the central court by an antechamber. It features a low ceiling, no windows, and a gypsum throne flanked by stone benches. A lustral basin within the room, along with depictions of griffins and palm trees, hints at its religious significance, possibly as a site for ceremonies rather than royal audiences. Adjacent to the throne room was the tripartite shrine, identified by impressions of wooden columns and a central recess believed to have supported a raised platform. Behind the shrine were temple repositories where votive offerings were found. Nearby were the West Magazines, a series of 22 long storage rooms linked by corridors. These housed large storage jars capable of holding up to 50 gallons each, with a total capacity exceeding 400 jars. Essential goods for the palace economy, like olive oil and wine, were stored within. Next to the west wing was the West Court, a large open area paved with limestone slabs and lined with raised walkways that facilitated movement and ceremonial processions. Situated directly in front of the western facade of the palace, the court served as a vital communal hub, connecting the palace to the surrounding town. Within the court were 3 circular pits, each measuring approximately 5 to 6 meters in diameter and 3 meters in depth. The original purpose of these pits remains uncertain. They may have been used for grain storage, water drainage, or perhaps as planting areas. The western facade of the palace, overlooking the court, featured niches that may have been decorative or functioned as window surrounds, possibly allowing the temple elite to observe events below. The southern edge of the west court contained the palace's second major entrance. From this point, a causeway led to the west porch, where visitors could follow the processional causeway. This path eventually brought visitors into the central court, the palace's main gathering space. South of the palace stood the caravanserai, a structure believed to have accommodated visitors. It included residential quarters and bathing facilities. As for the materials used to construct this palace, the complex was built using oak, cypress, and pine, alongside limestone, rubble, and plaster. Walls and floors were finished with smooth gypsum slabs, creating a polished, marble-like aesthetic. One of the palace's most remarkable features was its advanced plumbing and drainage system, a marvelous feat of Bronze Age engineering. Covered stone drains efficiently managed waste, particularly in the east wing, where multiple lavatories were located. Rainwater was channeled through light wells, which assisted in flushing waste with a mechanism that allowed water to be poured through a hole in the floor, connecting to an underfloor channel that directed it into a vertical pipe beneath each lavatory. Jointed clay pipes with tapered ends and lugs ensured secure, adaptable connections for straight or curved layouts. While once thought to supply water, these pipes apparently formed part of a sophisticated drainage system customized to the complex's hilltop location. Near the eastern entrance, reconstructed rainwater drainage channels showcased this ingenuity. Open clay channels funneled water down staircases through sediment traps and into stone drains, traveling 25 meters into a soakaway. Having explored the most elaborate temple complex and its surrounding town, we'll now take a brief look at the other major Minoan settlements. The town of Mallia was situated on the north-central coast of Crete. At the center of the town, as in Knossos, was the palace. At its heart lay the central court, a north-south oriented space measuring 48 by 23 meters, accessible from the north. The court was flanked by colonnades on its northern and western sides, constructed with wooden and stone pillars. In the middle of the court was a sunken area, likely used for ceremonial activities. On the east side of the court were the east magazines, used to house large storage jars. Adjacent to the magazines was the loggia, accessible by steps from the court and probably serving religious purposes. A grand staircase on the southern side led to the main hall, aligned with the court's altar and thought to play a similar religious role. To the west, a corridor lined with storerooms followed the traditional layout of Minoan palaces. The complex was surrounded by a great town covering an area of 40 to 60 hectares, featuring a network of streets, workshops, and residential buildings. The Minoan town of Phaistos was situated on the eastern end of the Kastri hill, overlooking the Messara plain. Built in two primary phases, the original palace was erected during the Middle Minoan period but sustained significant earthquake damage, leading to its reconstruction in the late Minoan period. The palace featured a vast central court lined with colonnades, a large west facade, extensive storage wings, and grand staircases that led to multi-level residential sections. These areas were distinguished by architectural details like alabaster-lined walls. Religious spaces were concentrated in the west wing, where sanctuaries connected by corridors and staircases were found. Phaistos was connected with two other settlements. Agia Triada, located nearby, served as a complementary administrative and religious site and rose in importance as Phaistos began to decline. Southwest of Phaistos, Knossos acted as its main harbour, featuring large buildings with extensive galleries likely meant for ship storage. Together, these three sites formed a highly organised and thriving regional complex. On Crete's far eastern coast lay Zakros, located in a small valley near a sheltered bay. This natural harbour offered protection and facilitated trade links with the east. The north wing of the palace housed administrative chambers, dining rooms and kitchens, all connected by corridors leading to storerooms. The west wing, which mainly featured shrines, contained valuable artifacts such as rhytons, stone vases and bronze axes. Zakros' east wing featured unique water installations, including a well, cistern, and a fountain room. The south wing served as the main entrance to the central court and included workshops for crafting artifacts, metal sheets, and loom weights. Surrounding the complex was a town with residential blocks, wine presses, and extensive storage and workshop facilities. Near the harbour road, a large furnace was discovered, indicating Zakros' significance in regional production and its role in export activities. Other towns such as Gurnia and Galatas featured smaller palaces and served as significant regional centres, though on a more modest scale compared to the four major sites. Additionally, numerous other settlements dotted the landscape, some independent like Alekastro and others organized around estate villas or ports. These smaller hubs were interconnected with the larger towns dominated by palace complexes, contributing to the broader network of Minoan civilization. As we mentioned, trade was fundamental to the growth of the Minoan civilization, fueling its transformation into a wealthy and sophisticated society through the accumulation of wealth and the exchange of cultural influences. This was especially evident during the Neo-Palatial Period, at the height of Minoan power, when their extensive trade network reached far and wide. To understand the impact of these exchanges, it is crucial to examine the Minoans' trading partners and neighbours, and how their interactions shape commerce and cultural ideas. To the north of Crete are the Aegean Islands, home to several cultures, with the Cycladic culture being the most prominent. The Cycladic people are known today for their complex settlements and shrines, as well as their famous marble figurines. The islanders were skilled seafarers and established early trade connections with Crete. The Minoans imported obsidian from Milos, copper from Seriphos, Kithnos and Sifnos, and emery from Naxos, among other materials. Cycladic influences, particularly in pottery, metalwork and funerary rites, can be seen in early Minoan culture. Evidence also suggests that some Cycladic people settled on Crete, either temporarily or permanently. The Minoans in turn would eventually expand into the Aegean Islands to establish trade outposts and colonies. On the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans, also known as Achaeans, emerged as a distinct culture around the 18th century BC. The most notable city was Mycenae, accompanied by other significant settlements such as Tiryns, Pylos, Thebes, and Athens. The Mycenaeans are known for their grand, fortified palace complexes and towns, often built on defensible hilltops with massive walls. It is unclear whether the Mycenaean cities were fully independent or part of a loose alliance. The Mycenaean social structure was highly organized, with a ruler at the top known as Vanix, supported by aristocratic councils and military leaders. Trade played a vital role in their economy, as evidenced by the presence of foreign luxury goods in their settlements and Mycenaean pottery found in Cyprus, Egypt, the Levant, and beyond. The Mycenaeans developed strong trade connections with the Minoans, who had a significant influence on their culture. Minoan luxury goods such as painted pottery, stone vessels, and weapons were found in mainland Greece. In return, the Mycenaeans exported materials like Spartan basalt, rosso antico from the Peloponnese, and silver ores from Attica. Many Mycenaean pottery and frescoes closely resemble Minoan art, though Mycenaean artisans also favored geometric patterns and depictions of warriors, chariots, and battles, reflecting their warlike society. A notable Minoan influence was on writing. The Mycenaean script, Linear B, was developed from Linear A. Deciphered in the 1950s by Michael Ventris, Linear B is now recognized as the earliest form of the Greek language. It was primarily used for administrative purposes. From around 1600 BC onward, Mycenaean culture expanded across the Aegean, gradually merging with island cultures and encroaching on Minoan territories. To the east of the Aegean, Anatolia was home to various peoples and cultures, including independent cities in the west and the powerful Hittite and Mitanni kingdoms in the east. The Minoans traded with these cultures, importing obsidian, tin, and luxury goods. South of Anatolia is the island of Cyprus, which had strong trade ties with Crete. Cyprus was rich in copper, which became a primary import for the Minoans. Thousands of Minoan pottery vessels have been found in Cyprus, and Cypriot pottery has been discovered in Crete. Around 1550 BC, the Cypriots developed a writing system heavily influenced by Minoan Linear A, known as the Cypro-Minoan syllabary. To the east of Cyprus is the Levant, a region inhabited by diverse peoples both along the coast and inland, with numerous independent city-states and small kingdoms. Although the Levant was often a contested area between major powers, many coastal cities gained wealth and influence through trade, connecting the Mediterranean Sea with Mesopotamia. The Minoans traded frequently with the Levant, importing goods such as pottery, siltstones, lapis lazuli, and ivory. In return, the Minoans exported oil, textiles, pottery, and lent the services of renowned artisans who were sought after to decorate royal palaces. To the south of Crete lay the powerful kingdom of Egypt, with which the Minoans had long established contacts. These interactions trace back to at least the period of the Old Kingdom, well before the rise of the Minoan palaces. The Minoans were known to have exported olive oil to Egypt. By the period of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt had regained stability and contacts with Crete became increasingly frequent. During the Second Intermediate Period, when Egypt was ruled by the foreign Hyksos, trade continued despite political upheaval. The most prosperous period of exchange came with the rise of the New Kingdom, when Egypt reached the height of its power. Minoans and Egyptians exchanged a wide range of goods, with the Minoans importing thousands of exotic items from Egypt, such as linen, alabaster, amethyst, carnelian, ivory, ostrich eggs, and various precious stones like jasper and hematite. In return, the Minoans exported oil, textiles, finely decorated pottery, as well as metal and stone vessels. Egyptian influence on Minoan culture is evident in various aspects, including architecture, art, warfare, and religious practices. Minoan art, for example, incorporated Egyptian motifs such as the blue monkey and depictions of papyrus. In terms of religion, the Minoans adopted amuletic symbols like the scarab beetle and the worship of the goddess Taweret. However, the cultural exchange was reciprocal. Minoan fresco painters were employed in Egyptian palaces and temples, where they created murals depicting landscapes and bas-reliefs. The Minoan presence in the eastern Mediterranean was undeniably powerful. They dominated the Aegean and influenced many other parts through extensive trade networks. But this raises a compelling question. Did the Minoans establish an empire, as ancient Greek traditions suggest? As we mentioned in the beginning of the video, the Greeks viewed the Minoans as the first to command a great military fleet, forming an empire led by a powerful king in Knossos who demanded tribute from his subjects. This notion ties into myths like that of King Minos and the Minotaur, in which Athens was compelled to send youths to Crete as tribute. Could these legends hold a kernel of historical truth? What is certain is that the Minoans were exceptional shipbuilders. Judging by their frescoes, their ships were long and narrow for speed and agility, distinct from the bulkier cargo ships of the time. Two castle-like structures at each end were connected by raised gangways. Their vessels often bore elaborate motifs. These ships were suited for both trade and defense. It is undeniable that there was a practical necessity of a fleet to protect Crete from pirates and secure maritime routes in the Aegean. Despite the early theories of the Minoans as pacifists, a view, as we mentioned, inspired by Arthur Evans, it is unrealistic to imagine a Bronze Age society surviving without some form of military capability in a region rife with conflict. The idea of a Minoan Empire gains plausibility when we examine their colonies. The settlement at Castri on Cythera, founded as early as 2000 BC, facilitated trade with the Peloponnese. Later colonies like Akrotiri on Thera, modern Santorini, Trianda on Rhodes, and Agia Irini on Kea became hubs of Minoan culture. Some settlements such as Philakopi on Milos and sites on the Anatolian coast like Iassos and Miletus show evidence of Minoan takeover either through peaceful integration or force. These colonies were primarily trading outposts, helping the Minoans extend their reach. Among these settlements, Akrotiri stands out for its size and the richness of its preserved archaeological record. The site reveals a vibrant settlement featuring Minoan-style frescoes, architecture, and even a small temple palace. Through these settlements, the Minoans spread their culture across the Mediterranean. Beyond the known colonies, the ancient Greeks referred to many settlements with the name Minoa, suggesting that they were once linked to Crete. These settlements spanned the Aegean islands such as Amoros, Paros, Sifnos, and Naxos, and extended to more distant locations like Corcyra, Sicily, and the Levant. While the term Minoa might signify a connection to Crete due to King Minos, its precise meaning remains uncertain. Ultimately, there is no evidence to suggest a unified Minoan Empire. Crete itself was composed of various independent states, often at odds with one another. While Knossos may have exerted significant influence during the mid to late Neo-Palatial period, it almost certainly did not control the entire island. What ancient memory might recall as a Minoan Empire could instead reflect a powerful Knossian state that commanded a substantial fleet and wielded influence over a large region in the Aegean. Furthermore, Minoan iconography and writing lacked the explicit expansionist themes seen in other Bronze Age powers which celebrated their military conquests. This absence of imperial rhetoric suggests that the Minoans may have prioritized trade and cultural exchange over military conquest. In conclusion, while the Minoans undeniably held considerable maritime power and maintained extensive trade networks, the notion of a Minoan empire remains speculative. The Minoan Golden Age came to a dramatic end following a cataclysmic event. Around 1500 to 1470 BC, the volcano on the island of Thera erupted in one of the largest eruptions ever witnessed by mankind. The blast destroyed much of the island, burying large areas in lava and ash. Leading up to and following the eruption, a series of powerful earthquakes struck, along with tsunamis that ravaged the northern coasts of Crete and dense ash clouds that blanketed much of the island, particularly its central and eastern regions. The earthquakes devastated major Minoan towns such as Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, Zakros, Moklos, and Palekastro, while the tsunamis destroyed the north harbors and sank thousands of ships. Dense ash clouds buried fields and pastures under toxic layers of ash which poisoned water supplies and decimated the livestock. This occurred just before the harvest, leading to an immediate food shortage as the Minoans lost an entire year's crop. The ashfall rendered farmland unusable for several years, sparking widespread famine. Beyond the loss of life and infrastructure, the effects of the eruption shattered the social order, severely disrupted the economy, and significantly weakened the Minoan naval power. To the Minoans, this catastrophe likely seemed like the collapse of their world. Evidence of large-scale religious rituals at various sites suggests widespread despair, with people seeking to appease the gods in an attempt to make sense of and mitigate the overwhelming destruction. Following the devastation of the Thera Eruption, the Minoans undertook significant efforts to rebuild their settlements. Some sites like Zakros and Moklos were abandoned entirely, while others experienced varying degrees of restoration. Mallia was only partially rebuilt, while Phaistos underwent a full reconstruction. The most extensive effort was focused on Knossos, which not only recovered but also emerged as the primary political, administrative, and religious center, indicating a shift towards centralized authority, likely an adaptive response to the challenges of the crisis. The eruption, however, had significantly weakened the Minoans' military power, leaving them highly vulnerable. Within 1 or 2 decades, the Mycenaean Greeks invaded and conquered most of Crete, marking the end of the Minoan states and signaling the decline of Minoan cultural influence in the Aegean Sea. Many settlements, including Zakros, Mallia, and Burnia, were destroyed in the invasion. However, Knossos remained intact and its temple system was preserved. While different Mycenaean clans governed various states across Crete, Knossos emerged as the most powerful. Under Mycenaean rule, Knossos not only retained its dominance but also expanded its influence, ultimately controlling more than half of the island. The Mycenaeans re-established the trade routes, transforming Crete into a central hub for commerce once again. Agia Triada rose as a major administrative center under Cnossian authority, while Phaistos declined. Many previously destroyed settlements were either abandoned or sparsely repopulated, though a few, such as Kydonia, were rebuilt and grew into prosperous centers. The Mycenaeans brought architectural and cultural practices to Crete. The Cnossians incorporated Mycenaean features into buildings and artifacts, creating hybrid styles in frescoes, pottery, and the design of palatial and religious spaces. One of the most notable changes is the construction of Mycenaean megarons. The adoption of Mycenaean funerary customs seen in the warrior graves introduced elaborate burials filled with bronze weapons, jewelry, and pottery, marking the rise of a Mycenaean elite on the island. Evidence of thousands of Mycenaean settlers across Crete suggests a significant presence. Under Mycenaean rule, the Linear B script was introduced to Crete, and Bronze Age Greek became the language of administration. Tablets from Knossos reveal a highly organized system with a new hierarchy of officials such as the Wanax or king, the Lawagetas or military leader, and other local rulers overseeing activities like textile production, agriculture, and religious offerings. These tablets also show the blending of Mycenaean and Minoan religious practices with the worship of early forms of Greek gods like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena. The prosperous period of Knossos ended around 1380 to 1360 BC, when the palace complex was destroyed by fire. The cause remains uncertain, with theories ranging from conflict between Mycenaean factions or with the city of Mycenae itself to uprisings by local Cretans against the centralized authority of Knossos. The destruction signaled the collapse of Knossos' political power, leading to a decentralized Crete. Regional centers like Chania, Agia Triada, and Komos rose in prominence, while Knossos saw only partial reoccupation, with evidence suggesting that parts of the palace remains functioned as small shrines. Trade in Crete would persist, with ports like Komos and Kydonia serving as central hubs. However, inland settlements grew in importance, reflecting a shift toward a more secluded society. The once grand Minoan palatial system faded, and Cretan society adapted to fragmented political structures, integrating further into the Mycenaean-dominated Aegean world. Around 1200 BC, a period of chaos and disorder known as the Bronze Age collapse began, marking the end of the Minoan civilization alongside the destruction of the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, and numerous other societies. The collapse was caused by a combination of droughts, earthquakes, social disruptions, and finally invasions by the so-called Sea Peoples, a coalition of various Mediterranean groups. As a result of the invasions, hundreds of cities and towns were destroyed. Egypt was severely weakened, and the Sea Peoples ultimately settled across several regions of the Near East. Prominent Minoan sites like Mallia and Burnia were destroyed by fire, and the population of the island sharply declined. Many communities fled inland, establishing fortified mountain settlements. It is likely that during this time, more settlers from mainland Greece arrived in Crete. Despite this destruction, remnants of Minoan culture persisted. The new settlements, though small, often featured shrines with Minoan symbols like bull, snake, and female figurines. However, the elaborate towns were long gone, replaced by small, village-based communities. Archaeological evidence indicates that Karfi and Katalimata were the only notable settlements on Crete during that time. Karfi, situated high in the Lassithi Mountains, had up to 150 houses, cobbled streets, a public square, and a shrine dedicated to a goddess. Katalimata, perched on the cliffs of the Thripti mountain range, was positioned above a ravine, accessed by a narrow ledge with terraces and fortified entryways for protection. The arrival of new groups in Crete, notably the Dorians from mainland Greece around 1000 BC, further eroded Minoan culture. By that time, Crete had already undergone significant change. The Dorians' arrival marked a great transformation of the island culture, contributing to the emergence of a distinct Greek identity. In the Archaic and Classical periods, Crete became a patchwork of independent city-states with a diverse population that included Dorians, Achaeans, the descendants of the Mycenaeans, and Eteocretans, a people that spoke a local language written in the Greek alphabet. By then, the Minoan civilization had faded into myth and legend. The cultural legacy of the Minoans, however, persisted in art, religion, and architecture, shaping the broader tapestry of ancient Greek civilization. Due to the lack of written sources, our understanding of Minoan religion relies entirely on archaeological evidence. Key insights are drawn from the remains of temples and shrines, as well as frescoes, seals, and votive figurines. Although this method is far from ideal for comprehensively reconstructing a belief system, it remains the only available approach and offers the most substantial insight into Minoan religious practices. Let us start by exploring the Minoan palaces. As previously mentioned, the so-called palaces were essentially large temple complexes that also featured council halls, storerooms, workshops, and residential quarters for the priesthood, officials, and workers. While the general features of the temples have already been discussed, we will now focus specifically on their religious functions and significance. The temples, aside from their enclosed shrines, featured large open courtyards where the community gathered for religious ceremonies. Architecturally, the palaces had a north-south alignment, with central courts, religious halls, and shrines designed to face eastward. This alignment likely reflected the importance of the solar and lunar cycles in Minoan worship. In addition, the orientation of many sites toward natural landmarks such as mountain ranges highlights the Minoans' connection to the natural world in their religious practices. In towns like Knossos, cult objects found in temple repositories provide further insight into the Minoan religion. Hundreds of items, including pottery, female goddess figurines, seashells, ceilings, clay plaques, mace heads, and traces of weed, have been discovered. At Zakros, votive objects included bronze double axes, stone lamps, ivory inlays, and writer or ceremonial vessels. Many of these vessels were made from marble, porphyry, or alabaster and were likely used for libations. At the Palace of Gunya, evidence suggests that large crowds gathered for ceremonies. Hundreds of conical cups were found, indicating communal drinking, and a stone altar, likely used for sacrifices, was discovered. These ceremonies took place in the central or west courtyard. There is evidence suggesting that such rituals occurred even before the construction of the temples. However, the building of the temples institutionalized these practices, with the central court likely reserved for the priests and the west court serving the whole community. Principal architectural features included chambers with bench altars, pillar crypts, and sunken lustral basins, suggesting spaces intended for both public and private sacred rites. A network of processional pathways led to the central courtyards, where public ceremonies were held. Extensive storage rooms contained offerings, tributes from townspeople, and votive objects, all managed by temple administrators. Common practices included burning aromatic herbs, offering grain, and animal sacrifices. Bull leaping was another significant ritual frequently depicted in art. While the exact location of such ceremonies remains unclear, it is believed they took place in the central or western courts of the palaces. The ritual involved acrobats performing daring feats with bulls, where some would distract the animal, while others, known as bull grapplers, engaged directly with it, even leaping over or onto its back. It is theorized that bull leaping served as a rite of passage for both boys and girls. Although only small figurines have survived, there is evidence of large statues, especially in the temples where clay feet and fragments of robes have been found. It is believed that these statues were primarily made of wood, with the robes being part of the ceremonial dressings applied by priestesses, similar to practices in contemporary Near Eastern religions. Frescoes within the palaces depict various ceremonial scenes, including processions, banquets, and bull-leaping rituals. The Sacred Grove and Grandstand frescoes show large public gatherings with prominent priestesses overseeing rituals from above. Priestesses played a dominant role in Minoan religious ceremonies, as evidenced by their frequent portrayal in frescoes. They were dressed in elaborate clothes, including layered skirts, headdresses, and jewelry, creating a striking visual presence. In addition to the great temples, many shrines have been found in major Minoan towns. These structures featured altar-like hearths and stone benches. Offerings such as libation vessels, lamps, and animal figurines have been found within. One of the most interesting aspects of Minoan religion was its peak sanctuaries. They first emerged between 2200 and 2000 BC and were positioned on hilltops and mountain ridges separating the island's valleys. Their elevated locations, exposed to constant winds, imbued them with a sense of sacredness and offered worshippers a closer connection to the divine, particularly to deities associated with the weather. Archaeologists have identified around 50 peak sanctuaries across Crete, situated at elevations ranging from 215 to 1,100 meters above sea level. The sanctuaries were often within sight of major settlements. Some sanctuaries were marked by votive offerings scattered around altars, while others featured open spaces enclosed by boundaries, and a few featured multi-room shrines or temples. The altars central to worship varied in form, including natural stones, purpose-built steps, or tables. Evidence also suggests the presence of clay and wooden statues. Nearby the sanctuaries, natural repositories were often used to store offerings. One of the most detailed depictions of a peak sanctuary comes from the Zakros Rhyton, an exquisite vessel carved from green chlorite, steatite, and originally gilded in gold. The Rhyton portrays a tripartite structure with a spiral-decorated central doorway surrounded by an enclosure wall and adorned with sacral horns. Goats and birds are depicted on the rooftop, with altars and offering tables in the courtyard below. The spiritual atmosphere of these sites was heightened by their natural surroundings. Excavations at these sites have unearthed a variety of artifacts, including figurines of worshippers. Some larger statues likely depicted deities, while smaller figurines served as symbols of individual devotion. Animal figurines, particularly cattle, sheep, and rams, were very common and often represented prayers for the protection of herds or agricultural prosperity. Other offerings included votive parts, perhaps as supplications for healing or health. Rituals at these sanctuaries included animal sacrifices, libations, communal feasting, dancing, and the lighting of great bonfires. While ceremonial gatherings may have been seasonal, shepherds and others who frequented the mountains visited these sites regularly. One of the most prominent peak sanctuaries was on Mount Euctus, located southwest of Knossos. This sanctuary was surrounded by a massive wall that originally stood 3 meters wide and approximately 4 meters tall. Over time, much of this wall has eroded. The sanctuary itself featured a 5-room temple complex, a large altar, and a stepped pathway. The decline of the peak sanctuaries began around 2000 BC as religious practices shifted toward urban temple worship. Although offerings and sacrifices continued at these mountainsides, they gradually lost their central religious significance as power and spiritual authority became concentrated in urban centers. The eruption of the Thera volcano further diminished the role of the peak sanctuaries, though a few, such as that of Mount Euctus, remained active due to their ties to Knossos. By 1380 BC, most peak sanctuaries had been abandoned. Cave sanctuaries were also a major aspect of Minoan religion. Initially, some caves would serve as burial sites, but over time, they became spaces of worship, chosen not only due to their seclusion, but also for their awe-inspiring natural features. Vast chambers, intricate rock formations, and natural pools lent these spaces a mystical and supernatural quality. Worship practices at these sites included sacrifices, feasts, and rites of passage connected to spiritual renewal. The ceremonies took place both within the caves and in surrounding outdoor areas which could accommodate larger gatherings. Each cave sanctuary had distinct features. The Psychro cave, located in the Lasithi plain, included both upper and lower chambers. The lower chamber is notable for its striking stalagmites in the seasonal lake. Outside, a narrow terrace offered space for libations, feasting, and dancing. Archaeological evidence reveals that pilgrims left numerous votive objects such as figurines, weapons, and jewelry. The ancient Greeks later believed that this cave was the birthplace of Zeus. Another important sanctuary is the Eleutheia cave near Amnisos, dedicated to childbirth. At its center stood a stalagmite resembling a human figure surrounded by a man-made wall, serving as a focal point for offerings. The cave remained a significant place of worship for thousands of years. The cave sanctuaries served as religious centers well before the Palatial Period and retained their spiritual significance long afterward. The Minoans worshipped their gods in a variety of sacred spaces beyond those that we already mentioned, including rural shrines set in open landscapes. These sites were often marked informally with stones, low walls, or boundary markers, while more prominent sanctuaries were likely enclosed by higher, more substantial walls. The Minoans also conducted religious rituals in small shrines located within their homes or near family tombs. These spaces are typically identified by benches, tables, or religious items such as female figurines and animal models. Now that we've introduced the places where Minoan deities were worshipped, let's explore the deities themselves. What gods did the Minoans believe in? What were their names and what attributes did they possess? This question is difficult to answer definitively, mainly due to the limited written evidence. Most answers are based on archaeological findings, particularly temples and shrines, and most importantly, depictions on seals, rings, and frescoes. With careful analysis of the archaeological record, several figures, symbols, and even a few names can be identified. Evidence suggests a strong presence of female deities in Minoan religious symbolism. Most depictions of female deities are associated with animals, plants, and fertility. This figure, often referred to by scholars as the Great Mother or Mistress of Animals, could represent one goddess or possibly two different ones. There is also evidence of a sea goddess suggested by votive offerings such as seashells, fish, and boat models found in shrines along the coast. Regarding male deities, at least two can be distinguished. One is a youthful god, often depicted alone or as a consort or helper to a more prominent goddess. This god is linked to fertility, harvesting, and seasonal cycles of birth and renewal. The other major male deity is the Master of Animals, a counterpart to the Mistress of Animals. This god is typically shown holding wild creatures. Additional gods were probably associated with specific domains, such as a weather god, inferred from big sanctuary offerings, and healing deities identified through anatomical votives and parallels with Egyptian deities. Evidence also suggests the presence of a craft god and war deities. Gods and goddesses are often recognized by their large size and their posture of receiving worshippers. Although written records are rare, a few names have been deciphered from Linear A tablets, as Sasara, Atano, and Nopina. However, their attributes remain unknown. Additionally, a 14th century Egyptian text that provides incantations for healing mentioned two Cretan deities, Razaja, the great god, and Ameja, a deity associated with healing. There is also evidence of hybrid beings with human bodies and animal heads who are depicted participating in libations and processions. One such creature, a dog-headed figure, appears on numerous seals. Whether these beings were gods, divine guardians, or something else entirely remains uncertain. Animals played a central role in Minoan religion and were associated with many deities and aspects of life. Lions symbolized strength and protection, while snakes symbolized fertility and the earth, often appearing alongside female deities. Dolphins, wild goats, and birds were tied to goddesses. Bees were linked to royal power and fertility, and wild goats were associated with masculinity and power, often accompanying the master of the animals figure in art. There is also a clear influence from Egyptian religion in the depiction of animals. Minoan seals and amulets influenced by Egyptian designs feature animals like monkeys, scorpions, scarabs, beetles, crocodiles, griffins, and frogs. The most famous animal associated with the Minoans is the bull. According to the Minoan beliefs, deities could manifest in many forms, such as humans, birds, snakes, and even inanimate objects like trees and stones. The gods would take these forms to deliver messages or watch over a ceremony. For this reason, certain trees were considered sacred, and libations were often performed in their presence. Minoan art frequently depicts processions in which offerings like flowers or animals are presented at battles. Rituals involving ecstatic dances were common, where priestesses would transform into goddesses, manifesting the deity through their movements. Several religious symbols have been identified. One of the most famous is the sacral horns, or horns of consecration, a recurring pattern found in shrines and altars. Another well-known symbol is the double axe linked to animal sacrifices and possibly representing a powerful goddess. Other symbols include the sacral knot, which may have signified a bond between worshippers and deities, and the Greek cross associated with the sun and its protective powers. Evidence of Minoan belief in the afterlife comes from their burial practices and artistic representations. They seem to have envisioned a serene, paradise-like existence after death, possibly comparable to the later Greek concept of the Elysian fields. This belief is reflected in the care given to the deceased, including the provision of grave goods such as food, drink, tools, and personal possessions, likely intended to sustain them in the afterlife. Funeral ceremonies were elaborate, involving sacrifices, libations, and music. The Agia Triada sarcophagus vividly illustrates such rituals, depicting processions of men and women presenting offerings, performing rites, and playing instruments in honor of the departed. The widespread use of larnaches, coffins inspired by Egyptian designs and adorned with intricate scenes, further underscores Minoan notions of an afterlife. These depictions often feature lush landscapes filled with flowers and wildlife. Some scenes also portray sea journeys, aligning with Mediterranean myths about the soul's voyage to the underworld. Additionally, the butterfly symbol, often associated with the soul, appears in Minoan art. One less frequently discussed aspect of Minoan archaeology is the evidence of human sacrifice. A notable example comes from Anemospilia, a temple at Mount Juktas near the Peak Sanctuary. Here, a 17-year-old male appears to have been sacrificed. Immediately after the ritual, an earthquake struck, causing the temple to collapse. 2 men and 1 woman who were present during the event were trapped and killed in the rubble. This occurred around 1700 BC, a period when, as previously mentioned, the first palaces were destroyed by multiple earthquakes. This incident suggests the sacrifice may have been an attempt to appease the gods and prevent further destruction. The broader role of human sacrifice in Minoan rituals remains uncertain. However, the available evidence suggests that it was a relatively rare practice. In the 15th century BC, Mycenaean beliefs were introduced to Crete. The introduction of this new belief system undoubtedly influenced Minoan religion. Many Mycenaean gods were adopted, either retaining their original traits or being adapted to fit Minoan traditions. The Linear B tablets of that time reveal that Mycenaean deities including Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Artemis, Hermes, Hephaestus, and Potnia were worshipped in major Minoan towns. Despite these changes, evidence suggests that Minoan ceremonial practices persisted. Although the temples were eventually abandoned and peak sanctuaries became less prominent, the Minoans continued to use cave sanctuaries and outdoor shrines, maintaining their deep connection to their sacred landscapes. The Minoan civilization is best known today for its extraordinary art, characterized by remarkable diversity. To fully appreciate its progression, we will examine Minoan art chronologically, tracing its evolution and the significant advancements in style and technique over time. The earliest evidence of art in Crete dates back to the Neolithic period, featuring figurines made of clay, stone, and marble, influenced by Cycladic designs. By around 3600 BC, clay vessels of various shapes and sizes begin to appear. This period also marks the emergence of metalworking, specifically copper tools, representing an advancement from the earlier use of stone and obsidian tools and weapons. An interesting discovery from this era is a red painted triton shell found in a shrine at Phaistos. The early Minoan period saw significant advancements in craftsmanship and artistic innovation on Crete. Pottery became a prominent art form. In the period between 3100 and 2900 BC, notable styles of pottery included the Agios Onouphrios ware, characterized by dark red diagonal lines arranged in parallel patterns or intersecting crisscrosses painted on a light background. Another style was the Lebena ware, featuring white paintings over a dark red base, and the Pyrgos ware, a dark grey burnished pottery. During the period between 2900 and 2300 BC, new styles emerged, such as the Vasiliki ware, known for its mottled red, black, and brown surfaces achieved through advanced firing techniques and a reddish coat of paint, and fine grey ware with its polished surface. Bird-shaped vases and rhytons also became common. Influences from the Cyclades and the Near East spurred the development of a stone vase industry, producing vessels from materials like obsidian and serpentine. Figurines of humans and animals, primarily made of clay but also marble and stone, continued to be produced. Another major development was the creation of seals. Seals served both practical and symbolic purposes and became essential tools for securing goods, marking ownership and signifying social status. Early seals featured geometric motifs and were crafted from stone or bone, later incorporating materials like ivory and steatite. Their shapes would slowly evolve from lenses to cones and even animal designs. These seals also functioned as amulets, often displaying symbolic or mythological imagery. The art of frescoes made its first appearance during that time, with the best preserved example being a hunting scene on a larnax which depicts humans hunting deer and ibex. The Middle Minoan period was a transformative era for Minoan art and craftsmanship. The construction of the first large temples fostered a concentration of specialized artisans including potters, stoneworkers, metalworkers, lapidaries, and ivory carvers who produced both luxury goods and practical items. Expanding trade networks connected the Minoans to the Eastern Mediterranean, bringing new materials from the Near East. Pottery advanced significantly with the introduction of the fast wheel and built kilns, enabling the creation of thinner, more refined vessels. While plain pottery for everyday use remained common, Minoan ceramics stood out for their elaborate decoration. Among the most well-known styles of this era was the Kamares ware, notable for its intricate designs in white, orange, red, and purple colors, painted on glossy black surfaces. These vessels often featured swirling curvilinear motifs like spirals, whorls, and arabesques, alongside depictions of leaves, marine life, and flowers. Some incorporated unique features like relief and applique techniques. Notable examples are the decorated cup of Mallia, displaying trees, cats, shells, and a bearded sphinx, and the decorated bowl of Palekastro, depicting a shepherd with his flock. Religious art from this period featured figurines of deities and worshippers, animals like monkeys and bulls, and boat models. Stone vessel production also advanced. By 1900 BC, Minoan craftsmen began working with harder stones such as mottled breccias and orange stalactite. Over the next 2 centuries, their work expanded to include various forms made from exotic materials like rosso antico and white speckled obsidian. They also crafted stone figures of humans and animals, such as the slayed head of a scepter in the form of a leopard. Seals underwent significant evolution in this period. They were often worn as necklaces or rings, making them convenient personal identifiers. Initially crafted from bone and ivory, seals later incorporated metals like gold and silver, particularly for elite signet rings. Some seals also adopted cylinder forms, a style borrowed from the Near East. Designs became increasingly elaborate, featuring animals like lions, bulls, bees, and goats, as well as scenes of hunting and fishing. Metalworking reached new heights through the import of raw materials and influences from the Cycladic craftsmen. The Minoans crafted luxurious vessels from copper, bronze, silver, and gold, alongside ceremonial weapons like ornate swords and daggers. ostrich eggs decorated with gold and other luxury items further highlight the skill of the Minoan craftsmen. At the start of the Protopalatial period, the Minoans adopted the art of faience making from the Egyptians. This technique involved using crushed quartz coated with a vibrant blue or green glass glaze. Initially applied to items like beads, it later adorned objects such as vases, plaques, and figurines. Jewelry also became increasingly intricate during this period. Men and women adorned themselves with bracelets, hoop earrings, finger rings with bezels, and pendants made from materials like amethyst, jasper, and carnelian. Notably, this era introduced techniques such as filigree, which used fine wires for decoration, and granulation, where tiny gold grains were soldered onto surfaces, both likely borrowed from the Near East. The Neo-Palatial period marked the pinnacle of Minoan art and culture. The ever-expansive trading network facilitated the exchange of ideas and goods with distant civilizations. These interactions introduced new techniques to Crete, while enabling the widespread export of luxury items. Within the Minoan colonies, local artisans combined traditional techniques with Minoan elements, creating a unique and evolving artistic identity. Minoan pottery reached unprecedented refinement. Early in this period, decorative styles shifted from light on dark to dark on light motifs, with nature-inspired designs becoming dominant. Animals such as octopuses, dolphins, and starfish were especially popular. Relief techniques persisted, with textured floral patterns adorning vases. Later, the tortoise-shell ripple style was developed, identified by blurred vertical stripes. Floral and animal motifs remained common, but the Minoans also produced remarkable Rhyton vessels, some adorned with faience. Minoan stone vase production also reached exceptional levels of skill and creativity. Designs often featured scenes of activities, such as the harvester vase, depicting 27 men returning from the fields, and the boxer vase, which shows scenes of boxing, wrestling, and bull leaping. Specialized Rhytons, sometimes shaped like animals, were used in cult practices, with the Knossos bull's head Rhyton being an example for its lifelike detail. The Minoans skillfully worked materials like steatite, alabaster, chlorite, serpentine, and marble, eventually experimenting with harder stones such as porphyry. During the Neo-Palatial period, Minoan seals became increasingly intricate. They often depicted animals and humans in natural settings such as rocky landscapes and rivers. Scenes of daily life were common, depicting interactions between people and animals. Seal crafting was enhanced by advanced tools such as magnifying glasses. Minoan metalworkers showcased exceptional skill in creating both functional and decorative items. They crafted bronze agricultural tools and utensils alongside luxury objects like gold vases, jewelry, and inlays. Gold, imported from Egypt and Anatolia, was reserved for the elite and used to adorn religious objects, figurines, and ceremonial items. Decorative motifs such as spirals and ivy were embossed on metal vessels. While very few metal vases have survived, numerous small objects and jewelry pieces remain, featuring designs of animals like lions, fish, ducks, and bulls, along with flowers, palm leaves, and signet rings set with gold or crystal bezels. During that time, shell and ivory were commonly used to decorate wooden furniture and objects. Shells were carved into inlays, while ivory was shaped into seals, decorative plaques, and figurines. The most distinctive feature of Neo-Palatial art, and Minoan art in general, is its frescoes. While the art form began in the Protopalatial period, most surviving examples date to the Neo-Palatial era. Frescoes were created by painting pigments onto wet lime plaster, with fine details added once the plaster had dried. The walls were prepared with layers of rough and fine plaster, and outlines were often sketched or engraved before painting. Some frescoes also featured low-relief plasterwork. Natural materials like red hematite, black shale, white lime, yellow ochre, and malachite were used for color, while blue was created from a synthetic Egyptian formula using copper compounds. Artists employed sponges for broad areas and brushes for finer details, finishing with a protective glaze of egg tempera. Minoan frescoes are renowned for their vibrant style, fluidity, and diverse themes. They adorned walls, ceilings, and even floors. Nature and religious ceremonies were central themes. While the technique was introduced from Egypt, Minoan frescoes developed their own distinct style, characterized by dynamic movement and vibrant colors. Frescoes have been found at several settlements, with the largest collection located at the Knossos Palace. Knossos features a series of frescoes depicting animals and natural landscapes. Among these is the Blue Monkey's fresco, located in the House of the Frescoes, outside the main palace. Another work from the same house is the Bluebird fresco. A notable example of wildlife imagery is the partridge frieze, which adorn the walls at the entrance of the caravanserai near the south entrance of the palace complex. Bulls, a recurring motif in Minoan art, are also prominent in the frescoes. In addition to wild animals, mythological creatures such as griffins appear in several frescoes, including both flat and relief styles. Many frescoes in Knossos also depict human figures, often in religious ceremonies. The procession fresco portrays men and women carrying votive offerings. The grandstand fresco, a smaller work located in the northern area of the central court, is among the most detailed. At the center is a tripartite shrine flanked by women in elaborate dresses. Women can also be seen in pillared platforms on either side, while a large crowd of men and women fills the background. This scene likely depicts a religious gathering, emphasizing the role of priestesses as central figures. The Sacred Grove fresco, a work found in the same room, depicts priestesses seated near blue trees, while others dance and chant below. Once again, a crowd of attendees surrounds the ceremony, depicted in both red and white colors. One of the best-known pieces of Minoan art is the Priest King or Prince of the Lilies relief fresco. It depicts a life-sized figure, possibly a priest or priestess, wearing a crown of lilies and peacock feathers. However, as you can see, its reconstruction is highly speculative due to the few surviving fragments. This is the case for most of the Minoan frescoes we see today. Close examination reveals that the surviving pieces are often small, rough, and patchy, meaning that restorers had to reconstruct much of the frescoes based on fragmentary evidence. In some cases, large pieces provided a solid foundation for restoration, but smaller or incomplete pieces required creative interpretation. As a result, some reconstructions, such as the Procession and the Priest King fresco, are highly speculative. Frescoes have also been discovered elsewhere in Crete, such as in the administrative centers of Amnisos, Tilissos, and on the island of Psyra. Outside Crete, Minoan frescoes have been discovered in Aegean settlements such as Agia Irini on Kea and Philakopi on Milos. It is unclear whether these frescoes were created by the Minoans, by Cycladic people influenced by the Minoans, or through a collaboration between the two. The largest collection of frescoes outside Crete is found in the town of Akrotiri on the island of Thera, modern Santorini. Akrotiri is one of the best preserved Bronze Age sites, as it was buried under a thick layer of volcanic debris during the Thera Eruption. Fortunately, the town's inhabitants had evacuated beforehand, likely due to prior volcanic activity and earthquakes. Covering about 50 acres, Akrotiri is rich in frescoes, which have been found in administrative centers, shrines, storerooms, and houses. Some of the most notable examples include the Boxer's fresco, which depicts two boys or young men engaged in boxing. They wear gloves on their hands and have long tresses of hair with shaved parts. Both are dressed in loincloths, while the boy on the left also wears several pieces of jewelry. The spring fresco is also very famous. It is one of the earliest known colored depictions of a natural landscape in history. Spanning 3 walls, it portrays colorful volcanic rocks dotted with blooming lilies or papyrus plants, while lively swallows fly among the flowers. The most detailed work in Akrotiri is the Fleet fresco. The fresco depicts a fleet of 8 large ships accompanied by 3 smaller vessels traveling between 2 towns. The town on the left lies on mountainous terrain encircled by a river. Within the town, people are going about their everyday lives, and the surrounding landscape teems with lush vegetation and wildlife. The right town appears more architecturally elaborate, resembling a palace complex, possibly the palace of Akrotiri itself. There is an abundance of natural elements in the fresco. The ships are adorned with flowers, butterflies, and swallows, while dolphins leap playfully among the ships. Following the Mycenaean conquest of Crete, the island's art displayed a fusion of Minoan traditions and Mycenaean influences. Frescoes at Knossos and the palace of Agia Triada continued to echo early Minoan themes, but adopted a more formalized and structured aesthetic. Clay pottery became a prominent art form, with workshops producing vessels for both local use and export. However, decorative designs grew increasingly schematic over time. Similarly, clay figurines of goddesses, once detailed and naturalistic, became rigid and simplified in form. Stone vase making, a hallmark of Minoan craftsmanship, completely disappeared during this period. Seal imagery shifted, moving away from vibrant depictions of marine life and birds toward more restrained images of human figures and symbols. Over time, these depictions lost their detail and craftsmanship, though the seals were still made from luxurious materials. It is believed that many Minoan artists were taken by the Mycenaeans to mainland Greece, which may explain the artistic decline on the island. Despite this, some forms of workmanship such as metalworking, jewelry, and weapon crafting flourished. During the Postpalatial Period, Crete experienced significant decline as its population dwindled and settlement shrank. Artistic production deteriorated, marked by the absence of large-scale works and a greater emphasis on practical objects. While some Minoan elements persisted, they displayed significantly devolved characteristics. Seal carving, for example, would slowly vanish. With the collapse of hierarchical society and the shift to smaller, less centralized settlements, seals were no longer needed for purposes such as mass storage or administrative control. Metalworking diminished considerably, concentrating solely on practical weapons and tools rather than the ceremonial daggers, swords, and elaborate jewelry of earlier periods. Fresco painting disappeared entirely during this time. Pottery entered a phase of decline, as seen in types like the granary style, characterized by sparse horizontal bands, and the closed style, featuring crowded patterns and indistinct motifs. Animal depictions became so abstract that they were barely recognizable. Figurines of goddesses were drastically simplified, often appearing stiff and cylindrical with rudimentary features. The era of Minoan excellence in craftsmanship was over. The Minoans were undoubtedly one of the most advanced civilizations of the Bronze Age, creating a distinct and vibrant culture that set them apart from their contemporaries. Their influence spread beyond Crete, reaching much of the Aegean and even shaping seafaring practices in the Levant, which played a key role in the rise of the Phoenician trade empire many centuries later. The Minoans also had a profound impact on the Mycenaeans and, by extension, on the ancient Greeks. Minoan religion significantly influenced Greek beliefs, with major deities like Artemis and Eileithyia tracing their origins to Mycenaean Minoan deities. According to the Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo, the Sanctuary of Delphi was established by the Minoans. The Minoan fertility god was the inspiration for Zeus Volcanos, a Cretan version of Zeus who was reborn annually. Pretomatis, a goddess of hunting and fishing worshipped by the Cretans during the Greek classical period, was a newer version of the mistress of animals. Known also as Dicta, she was associated with the Dicti Mountains, and her worship spread to city-states such as Athens, Aegina, and Sparta, even reaching the distant city of Massalia. Last but not least, the myth of King Minos and the Minotaur is one of the most famous legends of the ancient world and played a key role in the rediscovery of the Minoan civilization.